Hey guys, how many times have we heard that our symptoms aren't real and that what we're going through is all in our heads? Like so many people, my guest today was angry about this message, initially rejected mind body approaches, and even campaigned against them. Hi, everyone. I'm Raelan. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel, you can find over 150 interviews with people who have recovered from ME/CFS and Long Covid. These recovery stories on my channel are also part of a research study, and it's so exciting and rewarding to see how patterns of recovery are emerging. Today, I am super excited to introduce Louise McAllan over in Stirling in Scotland. Louise suffered for years from severe ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, and chronic migraines. Initially skeptical and strongly opposed to mind-body approaches, she eventually dove into the science, embraced what she learned, and as a result, she has thankfully fully recovered. She's here to share her experience, including everything that was helpful on her journey back to health. Louise, amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm a big admirer of all the work you're doing to get the word out there about recovery. So it's lovely to be here.
Well, you've had quite the journey with this. So I'm really grateful that you reached out and are willing to share your story. I think it's going to resonate for a lot of people and just be validating for a lot of people. So take us back. How did this all start for you?
Well, that's always a question. I always say it started in childhood, really, I suppose. But I consider myself to be living quite a normal life. I was a teacher, a primary school teacher in Scotland, stressful job, but you just got on with it. Life is stressful. And I was going to my work. I was married. All of these things. And I started to get these kind of symptoms, which were, I just didn't quite feel right. I didn't really quite feel like myself. And so I started maybe asking the doctor for some blood tests and things like that, and everything came back okay. So I was just feeling a bit kind of fatigued, a bit dizzy on my feet and getting some aches and pains and things. So that went on for about a couple of years, and I just kind of pushed through it. And I got to the stage where I was able to go to so I worked full time. I was able to go to work, but in the evenings and weekends, I was absolutely wiped out. I couldn't really, go out at the weekend or anything like that. And by the time Monday morning came, I would sort of dust myself up and get out of bed and kind of push through and go to work. And I worked with very young children. So I remember at times I'd be kind of sitting in the car, kind of psyching myself up to go into the building. And by the time I went in there, I'd be like, hi, morning, everyone. And so there was a lot of pretending I was okay, a lot of pushing through. And then one day at work, I had a big collapse, basically. And I had this episode where I kind of lost awareness of where I was. I completely dissociated. And I started having seizures. And it was just this big collapse. An ambulance was called. I remember in our ambulances in the UK, they've got these kind of black, shiny windows. And I remember looking, I was lying down and I looked around and my whole face had dropped on one side. And I thought, I'm having a stroke. This is a stroke. And so I was taken to hospital where I was having more seizures and very, very physical symptoms. My pupils were huge. My blood pressure was very, very low. My heart rate was very, very high. And I was having these seizures. So I got lots of testing. There were shining lights in my eyes every hour. I had CT scan, MRI scan, and they were all coming back as normal. And it was taken very seriously. But when all the results came back as normal, they started talking about functional symptoms. And they were saying to me, there's nothing wrong in your scans. And I didn't really know what that meant. I couldn't understand why I was having such serious symptoms, but they were telling me that nothing was wrong. And in that moment, my care changed. So I went from being very well looked after to being seen as being like I was making it up or I was some sort of malingerer. So my treatment in the hospital completely changed. And I ended up having to stay in for about 3 weeks because I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't get out of bed. I was having these seizures. And eventually I was just sent home. And I remember actually the neurologist coming by and seeing that I was still in the ward and saying, "What are you still doing here? Send her home." And I went home with no guidance as to what was going on in my body, no idea what was happening to me. And yeah, I just went home and rested. And in that time, I started to actually feel a bit better. And then eventually I had an appointment with neuropsychology, and they were talking to me about trauma and things like that. And I didn't really relate to having trauma, childhood trauma they were talking about. And they were actually saying to me, sometimes the trauma is so bad that we just forget about it completely. And I started to think, have I had some sort of really terrible trauma that I've forgotten about? And, I was looking through and to see and it just didn't make any sense. And then as I was getting a bit better, I was recommended for some rehab, and that was exercise therapy. And I went to that, and that just, after the first day of it, my body wasn't coping. Then I had to go back again. My body wasn't coping. And then I was in my bed. And from that point onwards, I couldn't get out of my bed. It pushed me into very, very severe symptoms. And those included, I couldn't sit upright. So I had postural tachycardia. I couldn't sit upright. So I had to just lie in bed. I could tilt a slight bit to try and eat food, but I couldn't have any visitors in the room. I couldn't tolerate light or sound. For many, many foods that I couldn't tolerate. I was having these seizures still, migraines, just very, very serious symptoms, and not really any help. So it was a pretty scary time. And I didn't really have a diagnosis. I didn't really know what was wrong with me. People were talking about functional symptoms. Didn't really know what that meant. And I started to look online. A lot of us, I was intelligent, inquisitive. I wanted to know what was wrong with me. And I went online and I found the ME community. And this was this big community of people who were having very similar symptoms to me. And I thought, I think I've got, ME, CFS. And so I went to see 2 different specialist neurologists who actually diagnosed me with the condition. And I met all of the criteria on the different criterias for diagnosing ME/CFS. My constellation of symptoms showed up on there. So I was diagnosed with that. And I think at that point I had joined that community and I started to hear the message that I had a physical disease. And, what they were saying about functional symptoms was nonsense. And it's not all in my head, and it's in my physical body. And there's no cure for it. And, people don't get better. And there's a very strong sort of message that you don't get better. So I just kind of continued on this path of being in my bed, not really knowing what to do, trying to see different doctors. It was difficult to get house calls, and some doctors wanted to help but didn't know how. Other ones didn't seem to believe me. And yeah, I just feeling kind of that sense of despair and it lasted for 8 years. And I never knew at that point it was going to last 8 years. So it's quite a typical story, is that we think, okay, well, I'll be better in a few weeks. And then we don't get better. And all right, well, I'll be better in a few months. And then it just goes on and on and on. And within those 8 years, I was fully sort of bedbound for about a year. And then I made it to the sofa and I could sort of potter around my house a little bit. And then after another year, I was able to go out in a wheelchair. But whenever I left the house, I had this massive, the post-exertional malaise. I had this massive increase in my symptoms after I left the house, and that would last for weeks sometimes. And so I couldn't leave the house very often. And then at my best, I could leave the house once a week, but I would pay the price for that for the rest of the week. But at that point, it was worth it because I wanted to leave the house and I wanted to try and do something outside of the house. So yeah, it was a real real journey through really very severe symptoms at times.
Because it just sounds like a terrifying nightmare to go through. And I'm just wondering, in those days, weeks, months when you were stuck in the house or stuck in bed, what sorts of things, how did you get through your day? How did you keep yourself sane, essentially, and keep yourself going through all of that?
Yeah, I'm quite proud that I did actually, that I managed to keep going. And I think people with these symptoms are amongst the most resilient and amazing people out there, because when you've got all that to deal with, you just have to find a way through. And fairly early on in my journey, I discovered mindfulness, and that really helped me. So my body wouldn't be still. And when I found mindfulness, it really helped with that. It helped me to cope and manage my symptoms a little bit, to learn that acceptance. And I took up, silly things, like little small things. I took up knitting, and I could do like a little tiny bit at a time before brain fog got really bad. And I met other people who were crafters who had chronic symptoms, and we built a little community where we would talk online, on Messenger or on forums and things. So there was a bit of little small things that I could do, and I think I decided fairly on, if this is going to be my life, then I want to make the best of it. So even though it's a much smaller life than I thought I was going to have, it's still my life. So I'm going to try and do things to find those small pleasures. And it's often a hard thing to describe, but the time goes so quickly when you're that unwell. It goes really slowly, but it also goes really quickly. And there's so much management of your condition that you don't really have enough energy or enough time to really be having to fill your time. So I used to sleep for 4 or 5 hours during the day. So that was a big chunk of my day gone already. And that was like a blessed relief to be able to sleep, because I couldn't sleep at night. And you were getting that respite from your symptoms for a short amount of time. So yeah, little things. I looked up, I tried to get into research, look up what might help me, what had helped other people. And yeah, it was a kind of, when things were really tough, it was a real take one day at a time. And when things were really, really tough, it was take 1 hour at a time, or take 5 minutes at a time. And your days just passed.
You mentioned that earlier on people had suggested that these were functional symptoms, and you didn't know what that meant. And I imagine a lot of people don't know what that means. So can you explain what functional symptoms are?
Yeah, well, they did say they're functional. And the way that they described it at the time, and obviously I know a lot more about it now, was that they said that they're to do with the functioning of your body. So they said it's the software rather than the hardware. So there's nothing wrong with your physical body, but it's to do with your brain and how your brain's communicating. And it kind of made sense to me at the time, in a sense that I knew that I had been very stressed. And in a way, I thought, well, if this is my brain kind of shutting down, it's too stressed, that makes sense to me. But there wasn't any treatment. And I was like, what do I do about it? I didn't know how to. This was in 2011, so I didn't have access to, all the stuff that's out there now. And this thing about trauma really turned me off, because it was like they were trying to say that I had this big trauma in my childhood, and I didn't relate to that. And I thought, well, I'm not sure that applies to me. So yeah, I didn't really get on board with it. But of course, now we know the link between the brain and the nervous system and the body, and how it all works together. But I think it was interpreted by me at the time as functional symptoms aren't real. They're in your head, or you're making them up, or it's some sort of, there was a real stigma attached to it. Like they were saying it was in my head, or it was a psychiatric condition. And I just kept thinking, but these symptoms are real. They're real. And of course, functional doesn't mean that your symptoms are not real. Functional symptoms can be very serious. But yeah, they're not to do with the structure of the body.
And it took you quite a while to get to this place now of understanding that, because you had quite a bit of resistance to this. Could you tell us a bit about that? Because I think that's something understandably a lot of people go through and will be able to relate to.
Yeah, I had a lot of resistance. 2 years into my journey, my first kind of encounter with this work was that my brother gave me John Sarno's book, and it was his book about back pain, and I wouldn't even say I read the whole book. I can't even say that I read the whole book, and that's a regret of mine now. But I sort of looked through it, and there was a lot about suppressed rage, and it just really, I felt really offended that my brother could think, I thought he doesn't think this is real. He doesn't think my symptoms are real. And B, I thought he thinks I've got suppressed rage. And I had a real judgment around that. I thought, I'm a kind person. I'm not an angry person. I don't have suppressed rage. How could, I wasn't in a place to hear that message. And so I sort of doubled down on this is not suppressed anger. This is my physical body. This is real. This is real. And I remember having that real sense of trying to validate my suffering as being real and my symptoms as being real. And I just, that was the kind of last engagement I had with any kind of resources. And then I got involved in the real ME side of things, which was, this is physical, this is real, this is a disease that I've got, and I can't get better. And so, I really had quite a strong opinion about that.
Eventually something happened to start to chip away at that. So what did that look like? How did that happen?
A friend of mine recovered, and I'd known this person. So my friend Fiona, and she now works in this field, and I had known her through a crafting community. And so I had seen her be extremely unwell. Sometimes we had a Skype call and she'd be like lying flat and she just looked, deathly. And so I knew that her capacity was very low and she wasn't very well. And she just appeared one day on Facebook and said, "I've recovered." And I remember the exact moment. I was actually sitting on the floor and I was having a kind of like, I don't think I can do this anymore. I've had it. I can't go on. And I opened my phone and it was her, and it was a picture of her as a child. And she said, "I've recovered." And something about it just really, really hit me. And I thought, I know this person. I know how ill she's been. Because one of the things when people recover, what would be that people would say, "Oh, well, you can't have had ME because people with ME don't recover." And I couldn't say that about her because I knew how ill she'd been. And I said to her, like, what? This is brilliant. What happened? And she'd recovered quite rapidly, actually. And she had used the Curable app. And I hadn't heard of it. And I kind of said to her, "Do you think that would help me?" And she said, "Look, just no pressure, just have a look." And I opened the app, and the first thing it said was, "Your symptoms are real. Your symptoms are not in your head. Your symptoms are serious, but your symptoms can get better." And there was just this big sense of validation that actually, no one was saying this wasn't real. And so that allowed me to kind of be a bit more curious. And then it went on to talk about the personality traits of people with these symptoms. And they talked about people pleasing and perfectionism and that kind of thing. And I could just see myself so clearly. It was like looking at myself in the mirror. I was like, how do they know that I'm a perfectionist? How do they know that I'm a people pleaser? And there was just this real sense of, that looks like me. I recognise myself in that. And the more I looked into it, the more I could really begin to see myself in that model. And the model talks about, it just made sense to me physiologically as well, because it's this message that we're not broken, that our bodies are actually undertaking their normal kind of physiological responses, but they've just gotten out of hand. Our bodies are designed to keep us safe, and this is what's happening. And it's not a case of curing ourselves, but rather it's more a case of attunement to the nervous system. And I just thought, well, that makes complete sense, because why why do I have all these crazy symptoms? Why does that person there with the same diagnosis as me have a slightly different constellation of symptoms? Why are these things happening to me that don't really make a lot of sense physiologically? Like I could potter around in my house. I could walk to the bathroom, but I couldn't open my front door and walk down my front path. Why could I walk inside the house, but I couldn't walk outside the house? Physiologically, it made no sense. So for me, it was just really this, it was like I had this kind of bodily understanding that this applied to me, and that this could help me. And the way I opened myself up to it was I had found hope quite painful. I had spent lots of years working on acceptance. And when you're in a very acceptance and in a state of acceptance, hope becomes quite painful. And I had hoped before. I had tried other things and it didn't work. And then your hopes are dashed. And so at the time, I was having really serious migraines, and I was having several migraines a week. They were absolutely horrendous. So I said to myself, I'm going to use this approach, the brain retraining, and I'm going to try and get rid of my migraines. And that made it accessible to me, because I wasn't saying I'm going to try and get rid of my ME. I thought I'm just going to try and get rid of my migraines. And if I can do that, life will be much easier. My quality of life will really improve. I didn't think for 1 second that I would get rid of all the fatigue and all the post-exertional malaise and temperature regulation and POTS and all the other things. And so I started working on the migraines, and I became able to prevent the migraine. And that gave me the evidence that I needed, that this was actually going to help. And I think that's a big thing, because I see a lot in this community that people say, you have to 100% believe that your symptoms are not structural for this to work. And I just don't think that's true, because what that does is it gets us into the mode of trying to prove that, that it gets us we focus our attention in the wrong place. I think it's absolutely okay to go into this with a bit of skepticism and a bit of curiosity, and really to say, what if? I wasn't 100% convinced, but I thought, what if I could get rid of these migraines? And then about 2.5 weeks into using the app, and really everything was just clicking into place for me. I woke up in the morning and I just felt completely different, and I just knew it instantly. And it was such a surprise that it was like, when you live with these symptoms, it's like having a fog in front of your eyes. It's like looking at life through a sort of misty window. And I woke up in the morning and there was just this clarity. And I stood up, and I just knew that something really big had shifted. And it was just like this complete surprise that I felt better.
This is absolutely incredible. Oh my goodness, I've got goosebumps so many times while you were talking. Just so amazing. And I think you pointed out something really important, something that I hear from a lot of people, is that, because yes, we're understanding a lot more about the brain body connection and the autonomic nervous system, but we don't understand it all. There's so much about the brain that we don't understand. And there are a lot of programs out there, and they have different takes on it. It's repressed rage, it's childhood trauma, it's a hypersensitive, threat assessment system. And they probably all have it a little bit right and a little bit wrong. Yeah. So, you find that one that clicks, you're like, no, wait, this fits for me. Like for you, it was curable. But also curable being, science backed, I'm sure helps, because then you can more get that buy-in, and that you need to hear it in a way that fits with your experience. Otherwise, I can see how people just dismiss it. Like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. And curable is amazing. For people watching, I can share, I've got a link for 6 weeks free of it if you want to give it a try. I use it. I think it's just a helpful thing. And just really spells things out for you in kind of easy to absorb ways. I'm curious though, because I've never been in the online communities where belief in recovery is not allowed or a thing, but I hear about it from a lot of people that I interview, that they're kicked out of groups or out of forums because they speak of recovery, and they're flat out told that that's not possible. So from your understanding or your perspective, where do you think that comes from, and why do people hold on to that belief so strongly.
I think, I mean, I couldn't speak for everybody, but for me, there was a real sense of needing that validation that my symptoms were serious. And there was a lot of stigma around. I think there's been a lot of, so the history is quite long with this. And there's been a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of people being harmed really through being told that their symptoms are all in their head or that they just need to change the way they think. And we know that particularly with severe ME, people can be very, very severely unwell. And I think for me, my part of it was that I knew that I really felt seriously unwell, and I felt very invalidated when people were saying, "You're fine, there's nothing wrong with you." And I think communication is very, very important. And I speak with a lot of doctors now who are like, how can I speak to my patients? What is the right thing to say? And, you know, it's this understanding that the validation that actually you're very, very unwell and that's real. I think that's the key thing. And I think for me, when people were recovering, it threatened my sense of what I had being serious. You know, if people were just recovering and, well, what did that mean? You know, are people not going to believe me that I'm genuinely unwell and this is a serious thing? So for me, there was a lot about validation, I think. But yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, if people are out there saying they're recovering and some of them doing it fairly quickly, and you have already been struggling for so long, have not recovered, already not getting validation, not getting the support you need, the help you need, I can see how it could feel like it's just continuing to chip away at that. And well, just get on with it. Just get better like those other people did.
Yeah.
As if it's this, you know, one size fits all magic bullet that can help everybody.
And that's it as well. I think a lot of people have been open to these techniques and they have tried them and they haven't got better. And so there's this sense of maybe like a sense of, I hear quite a lot of people saying that they feel gaslit because they've tried it and they didn't get better. And then the blame goes on to them for it not working. And yeah, I think there's a lot there to unpack. And it's just really important, I think, to be so respectful of everyone's experience. And that's again where kind of validation comes in. And a lot of people I work with have tried curable, they have tried brain retraining, they've read all the books, they've done all the things, and they're still not better. And the conclusion they either draw is that I'm too broken, I'm too far gone, or this just doesn't apply to me and I've got something structural and that's why these techniques aren't working. So yes, there's a lot of nuance in it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's unfortunate, you know, for all sides of it, because also I'm sure, I would imagine you felt a little bit of this as someone who has recovered. It's also sort of adds to the, I don't want to say trauma, but just the struggle that you have to go through, that when you do finally recover, before no one believed you were sick and now you recover and now people are telling you that you still again, well, then you never really were sick. And which can be an extremely invalidating thing to hear when you know how sick you were and what you had to go through to get here. So yeah, it's just, I think it's a really good conversation to have because there can be animosity in our community and it's just, I think people just not understanding. No one out there is trying to be malicious or, you know, any of those things. It's just, we're all coming from our different perspectives and it's an impact.
And I think it speaks as well to lack of support that, you know, if you're able to access a coach or access a program and it works for you, that's great. But there's no coordinated support for people who are more severe. They don't have access to the same services. And, you know, there's a wider conversation there about, you know, how do we make this stuff accessible to people and so that they can access it and they can try it out and making that a very safe container where they can try these things out and there's no blame if it doesn't work. You know, we just try something else. And where can we get that support, you know, put into place?
Yeah, it's almost like a bit of the Wild West that's happening right now with recovery because we are actually understanding a lot and moving forward. And from my experience, what I'm seeing, it's the health coaches and the recovery programs that have this information. People aren't finding it in their doctor's offices. So they have to leave the conventional medical system that they've known and trusted, and that,
Yeah.
it has layers of accountability and research and all of that, to this space that is unregulated. We don't know who to trust. And a lot of it's out of pocket. And most people are struggling financially, so they can't afford to just try 10 different programs and pay for them and see which one works. So yeah, it's great that we have such a greater understanding, but we still have such a long way to go, because it's still a very confusing minefield out there for recovery for people trying to figure this out.
Yeah, particularly if you're very unwell and you don't have the personal resources to be trying things out, and you can't build up your hopes, and you can't make those decisions about what to try out because you're not well enough. You can't afford to try anything that might make you worse, and you're cautious, and it's good. I am involved with an NHS funded program and work in collaboration with a group of physiotherapists and doctors. We all collaborate. We're Pain Plus Scotland, and it is happening. It's happening. This stuff is getting out there to patients to be free at the point of access, and it's fantastic to be a part of. But it's how we do that in the most inclusive way.
So tell us about the work that you do now, supporting people.
Yeah. So after I recovered my symptoms in those 2.5 weeks, I had a huge issue with my emotions. I still was getting symptoms whenever I had emotional stress. And I think lots of people with ME would agree that their symptoms get worse with emotions. And there were things coming up for me that had happened decades ago that I hadn't properly processed. And I really became very interested in the emotional processing side of things. And when I had kind of started to recover, I got some counselling, and it was talking therapy, and I was trying to process some things through, and I just kept telling the story, and the therapist was saying to me, "But how did you feel?" And I couldn't access how I felt. I was completely blocked off to that. I couldn't feel emotions in my body. I didn't. And in the end, she gave me an emotions wheel. And I was just picking the ones that I thought were most appropriate. So if that happened to someone, they would feel angry. And then she would be like, "How would you feel?" And I would say angry. And I didn't, I couldn't access it. And that was part of for me, was this shutdown of this. Our systems are designed to cope with short bursts of stress, occasional short bursts of stress. And the world that we're living in now, we're having this continued, prolonged exposure to stress. And we're not really taught how to process emotions. So as children, we're taught be seen and not heard, and it's not acceptable to express our emotions, and being a good girl. And that for me was a really big part of everything that was going on for me. I was emotionally quite suppressed, which took me full circle to the 2 years into my illness and the suppressed rage thing, which was a sort of, but yeah, I work with people who've tried all the things and just can't get better. And the missing link, or the key to it all, really is this emotional processing work. And I always say, if you've done the brain retraining and it's not hitting the spot and you're not getting better, we have to look at the emotions. And suppressed emotion is the largest cause of stress. The area that processes emotion, and the amygdala, is responsible for the generation of symptoms, and it's just so closely linked. We're getting more and more research about the immune link to emotions. And so I call my work Coming Home to the Body, because it's about coming home to the felt sense of being in our body. Now, when we've got physical symptoms, the body is not a nice place to be. So we learn to avoid and suppress and distract, and we can actually develop quite a lot of fear around our symptoms. And when we work somatically with that, we can actually learn how to process emotion. And the work that I do is, we do the brain retraining, because for the post-exertional malaise and the different things, we need to retrain the brain. But then this huge chunk of it is getting in touch with our emotions, exploring where did we learn about emotion? You know, we might have had parents who had their head in the sand, or who, you know, were loving, but they had to fix, you know, whenever you felt an emotion, it had to be fixed. You had to feel better. Or often people come from settings in childhood that were emotionally quite volatile. So they had to walk on eggshells, and they got into this kind of, you know, hypervigilant state. And with the symptoms that we have, we working with the felt sense of the body is just, it opens up a whole new world of exploration, and people have these insights. I think the problem is we're so often trying to follow particular guidance, and there's so many amazing coaches out there, and everyone is doing such fantastic work, but there's quite a lot of noise. And like you say, there's so many different kind of nuances and approaches now that it can be hard to find our own voice within that. And working with the emotions, working with our fear, working with releasing some of these emotions can really help us to tap in with that intuition of, you know, maybe this is about boundaries for me. Maybe this is about, you know, it remaining safe. And so we do lots of emotional expression. And this is like, I trained with Howard Schubiner, and lots of people are familiar with his work. And it's this sense of, when we're not, our bodies are designed to be fluid with our emotion, to process emotion through. And when we're not doing that, it causes a huge amount of stress. And actually, quite often, when we've got fatigue, it's this kind of shutdown, this dissociation, this separation from ourselves, and we really have to learn to get back in touch with our body and our emotions, which is what we do.
This is amazing. And I was thinking as you were speaking, this sounds like the absolute core, the heart of, you know, all the main successful approaches out there, from, you know, Schubiner to Dr. Sarno to Alan Gordon, and all of these different therapies. This is the kind of the key to it all. So I think this is incredible that you're doing this work. For people watching, everything that you need to know about Louise McAllan, the coaching that she does, everything that she has available is in the video description. So I really encourage you to expand that and take a look. If her story resonates, if her approach resonates, just take a moment just to check out what she has available, and maybe reach out and have a conversation, because she's doing incredible work with people. I'm so excited for you. Oh my goodness, what a journey you've been through. It just breaks my heart to hear about the suffering that you've had to go through, and the lack of support, and how you were dismissed, and just so many levels of unfairness and cruelty there. And just, but you now is incredible. I'm so happy that you made your way here, and then now are spreading that forward and helping, you know, helping with all the millions of people that are still in this and trying to figure out their way past it. So just thank you. Congratulations on all that you've done, and thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for taking the time to come on my channel and to share this with viewers here.
Thank you. And thanks for all the stories that you share. It's just so important that we have this range of information that we can, you know, we can see, do we resonate with it? It gives us hope. It gives us that, just opens that door, doesn't it, into that possibility.
Yeah, I love that there's so many different people now that are doing coaching, because like so many of us are seeing, we can get similar information all different sorts of places, but finding that one person that speaks your language and just makes you feel good is just really important for this. So I'm sure you're that for so many people. Yeah. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who's watching. I want to send a thank you also to our member, Hema Mystery. Thank you, Hema, for joining the channel. I appreciate the support. I hope you're enjoying all the free perks. And to those of you watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And I hope to see you in this next one.